morning, everyone. Today we have with us Professor Marc Jacobs. He is a specialist in heritage studies, folklore studies, and cultural policy. He is the coordinator and the holder of the UNESCO Chair on Critical Heritage Studies and the Safeguarding of Intangible Cultural Heritage. And he's the chairperson of the Heritage Education Commission at the Faculty of Design Science in Antwerp. Thank you so much for being with us today, Professor Jacobs. I give you the floor.
Thank you very much. So I will be talking about safeguarding intangible cultural heritage in, between inverted commas, Belgium. And I will try to explain this. So what you see on the screen is a map of Belgium. I see two different maps. On the right on top, you see the regions. The north, the dark green is called Flanders, where they speak Dutch. And the south is the Walloon part. It's the French-speaking part of Belgium. And in the middle, with the number 2, you see the Brussels capital. And this is division of regions, but we also have another division, and that's the map what you see below. It's once again Flanders, the French-speaking part, but with number 6, you also have this German-speaking part, about 70,000 people who live there and are all part of that Belgian unity. And as far as heritage is concerned, the region is competent for monuments and landscapes. And if you try to remember this, as long as the heritage is connected to the soil, to the ground, like for instance, a monument, it's fixed on the ground, or a landscape, you can also imagine it's fixed on the ground. And archaeology, as long as the objects are beneath the soil, so not yet excavated, they're competence of the region. And in the region, we have a minister responsible for immovable heritage. But as far as culture is concerned, and that's language, then we go to the system of the communities. And there we have a minister for culture and for culture heritage. So all the heritage connected to living human bodies, or heritage that is movable, not fixed to the ground, like for instance, objects in museums or archives, they are a competence of the Flemish community or the French-speaking community, and hence competence of the Minister for Culture. So please try to remember this. So, and as far as intangible cultural heritage is concerned, it is of course the competence of the communities connected to living human bodies. And there are 3 communities that have been distinguished: the Flemish community, where Dutch is spoken, the French-speaking community, where they speak French, and then the German-speaking community, where they speak German. Okay, so this is a first attempt to explain how Belgium works. Now, for the 2003 convention, I've made a slide here with, on the left side, activities in UNESCO, and on the right side, decrees and evolution of the laws in Belgium in the 2 communities. Because I have to say, Belgium is a federal state, so the national level, Belgium does not have any competence in the field of intangible cultural heritage. It's delegated to the communities. They are part of, they are sovereign up to a point. So there are at least 3 different parts with different policies in Belgium. And why did I say at least? You will discover during my talk. So in 1998, there was a Flemish decree on popular culture, on folklore, but also on associations for cultural heritage, local heritage, local history, and so on. And in 2002, there was a special decree of the French community, the decree on movable cultural goods and intangible cultural heritage. We'll discover it in a minute. So this was prior to the 2003 convention. And I had the chance of being together with Jean-Pierre Ducastel, part of the expert group drafting the 2003 UNESCO Convention for the Safeguarding of Intangible Cultural Heritage. It was the period that the masterpieces of the oral and intangible heritage of humanities was launched with proclamation in 2001, 2003, and 2005. But as you know, in the negotiations, the experts decided not to go for this masterpieces list, but to invent another type of list, the representative list. Nobody knows what the word representative actually means. That's why we achieved consensus. But it was clear the masterpieces list was out. So in 2003, this convention was accepted by the General Assembly of UNESCO, and Belgium ratified it in 2006. And Belgium was quite active between 2006 and 2008. We were a member of the Intergovernmental Committee making the operational directives that were launched in 2008. Okay, what else do you see on the screen? On the right, I refer to Decree on Cultural Heritage Policy in Flanders, where that decree from 10 years earlier was integrated. And the word popular culture was still used. It was only in 2017 that the notion of intangible cultural heritage was fully embraced and adopted in that lawmaking. And I also mentioned in 2010 a policy note. Let's look first at the decree of the French-speaking community. And you will see there that they have launched the idea of the chef-d'œuvre du patrimoine oral et immatériel, so masterpieces of oral and intangible heritage. And the colleagues of the French-speaking community, they wanted to be ahead of everyone and already accept a decree a year before the 2003 convention was accepted. But I guess they made the wrong bet because, as I told you, the masterpieces regulation was not continued and replaced by the representative list. And up to now, 2022, 2023, this law hasn't changed. So, and if you look at the different regulations, they have a commission indicating one of those chefs-d'œuvre. And what you can do according to the law is also present this to UNESCO for the masterpieces of oral and intangible heritage. But as you know, this list doesn't exist anymore. So they have to interpret this decree as a procedure for going for the representative list. Okay, so that's one system. It already indicates that in one part of Belgium, the French-speaking community, there is this approach to heritage more based on the older notion of these masterpieces and of folklore. And so they have this interesting tension with the representative list. Some examples that were inscribed in UNESCO are, for instance, a beer culture. That is a Belgian file, but also the marches between the river Sambre and Meuse, and so on. So they have a series of these items. And on the right, you see the processional giants in Belgium and France, and also the Carnival of Binge, two masterpieces that were inscribed in 2003 and 2005. And then automatically transferred to the representative list. Okay, if you go to another part of Belgium, the Flemish-speaking community, you remember I referred to the Cultural Heritage Decree. And while this Cultural Heritage Decree was made, the legislators, the Minister for Culture and the Flemish Parliament, they were inspired by the European Framework Convention on the value of cultural heritage for societies, so-called Faro Convention of the Council of Europe. And in that framework convention, a very interesting notion was launched, the heritage community, consisting of people who value specific aspects of cultural heritage, which they wish within the framework of public action to sustain and transmit to future generations. And this idea was adopted by the Flemish community, but they also tinkered with the formulation, and they added, next to people, organizations. And this was a very clever move because this allowed to think in terms of networks, both of people, associations, but also organizations like museums, archives, etc. And it totally changed the notion of what a community is. And this is quite handy, on the one hand, to organize the policy in terms of networks. If you identify one key organization working on a specific theme or a specific aspect of cultural heritage, and you subsidize them, and you ask them to offer services for the whole heritage community, everyone connected to a specific type of heritage, that's a way to organize. As I've also tried to indicate in a number of publications, it's also useful to adopt this heritage community definition when interpreting the 2003 convention and the notion of community there, because luckily the community is not defined, and thanks to this special trick of the interpretation of the Faro Convention, we can make this convention work better. As you see on the right, in a new version of the Cultural Heritage Decree in 2017, the same definition was still used. And one of our Italian colleagues, Loso Zagato from Venice, he published about this item and this special creative solutions of interpreting international text and applying them in policy. Okay. What else is there to perhaps remember or pick up from the Flemish side or the Flemish community? In 2010, an interesting document was published in 3 languages. You can still find it online. And in it, the minister and the government explains the policy. And one of the things they did in launching that vision text was to change the translation of the word safeguarding. Safeguarding used to be translated as bescherming in Dutch, which means protection. And they said, if we look at the definition of safeguarding, you see that protection is part of that definition. So you cannot define protection as a number of things: research, preservation, promotion, enhancement, and so on, and protection. It's illogical. So the government decided to launch a new word called borgen to indicate that safeguarding means something different than just protection. And I think that's an interesting linguistic innovation, which also says that policy is interpreted in a specific way. In this policy document, they also explain that the government does not want to do this alone, but they rely on a whole network of NGOs. And in the decree of 2017, even a special coordinating and sensitizing NGO, Werkplaats Immaterieel Erfgoed, Workshop Intangible Cultural Heritage, was appointed to coordinate these network activities. So in Flanders, a different approach. And you can see this on this slide, the network in Flanders. There's that Workshop Intangible Heritage, a whole series of entities financed on the Flemish level, working on specific themes. And then for the local level, local heritage cells. And all these are interconnected. Okay. Still in the Flemish part, for the inventory, how does a community or a group apply for inclusion of the inventory? It's a bottom-up process. You can apply by submitting your request on a special website, immaterieelerfgoed.be, organized by the Workshop Intangible Heritage. And what I've indicated here on the screen is how to submit an application and what kind of documents you need. Basically, it's a very open system. You are advised to seek help from one of those organizations on the Flemish level or the local level, and they can help you build the file and especially develop a safeguarding plan. There's a call every 6 months to do that, and there's a group of specialists, also members of NGOs and heritage communities, that decide on inclusion or not, and then the Minister for Culture decides on including it. And this yields a very interesting website, immaterielerfgoed.be. If you go to it, you can use Google Translate to translate it in English. And here you see, on the one hand, this inventory, but on the other hand, it's a big database of accumulating experiences, knowledge, plans to give future to heritage. And if you go there, you will find a whole series of little films, publications, tools to work on safeguarding intangible cultural heritage. So it says a lot about how this policy is organized. Okay, so we have this French-speaking community with their masterpieces approach, the Flemish-speaking community with this network and experience accumulation approach. You also have the German-speaking community, and this is the webpage of the intangible heritage site, Immaterielles Kulturerbe in German. And here you see that they embrace the convention, but they do not have a lot of items on their list: beer culture, archery, French fries eating, Morse code using, and presentations in local theaters. And the German-speaking community, they took the lead in submitting Belgian beer culture in the name of all the other communities to the UNESCO. And this is part because the head of the administration in the German-speaking community is an active amateur brewer himself. So we really like this file. And something new happened. So Belgium is a federal state, but constantly on the move. And there was a recent change in the how the state was organized in 2014. And by interpreting a little phrase that said that the Brussels capital region is responsible for heritage, the politicians in that region, they said, well, patrimoine, it's heritage, so it includes intangible cultural heritage. So even though we are a region, you remember that idea, regions responsible for immovable heritage and communities for cultural heritage, also intangible heritage. So they said, from now on, we also take the responsibility for intangible heritage. And so that's what happened since 2017. And they launched a special also legal instrument recognizing the intangible heritage of the region. And they adopted a number of the ideas that were experimented with in the other communities. You see it here on the screen in Article 24 and Article 26, where they took up the idea of communauté patrimoniale, heritage community, as inspired by the Faro Convention. But if you read it closely, Article 24.2, you see that they adopted the Faro Convention version and not the creative Flemish version. So, and they also make an inventory of intangible cultural heritage, and you see here what is an important identité bruxelloise. So they use it as an identity marker, and they have a whole series of elements on the Brussels list, elements that also sometimes appear on the list of the Communauté Française, who also nicknamed themselves the Fédération Wallonie-Bruxelles, and items they put on their list in the French-speaking community, they were also put on this Brussels list. And the same indicates for what is happening in Flanders. So they are creating this Brussels identity. A good example is, for instance, the Meiboom, a feast every year in the summer. And you see that they actually also post factum include themselves in the representative list. Okay. So Belgium, 4 different policies, 4 different competent ministers, 4 ministries, 4 different networks. And together they have one voice in UNESCO. And you have this whole list, what you see in front of you now, a number of elements that were included on the list of intangible cultural heritage. And there's even one that, unfortunately, due after a lot of controversy, was also removed from that list as Carnival. And they have this indication, but that's part for another story, for another lecture. So Belgium, like the other European countries, they submitted a periodic report inspired by the overall results framework, so the theory of change. And this report, to report on the complexity of everything that happened, even in the last 5 years, it consists of more than 300 pages. So if you want to read everything I've tried to explain you can look at that periodic report. I think by the end of 2023, it will be released on the UNESCO website. While making this report, the Flemish community also said it's time to republish this policy vision note, and that's what they did. They published it in Dutch in May 2022, but after the meeting in Rabat in 2022, in November, they will also distribute a version in English for free so that you can ask. So what are the future developments? This is my last slide, and I'm concluding. So Belgium, in fact, the 4 different entities, 3 communities, 1 region, they are progressing thanks to making this report for UNESCO. They are trying to see how they can align the different policies, but still it will be 4 different policies in the future. What I predict now and what will be an interesting evolution is partly inspired what will happen in Europe. And I want to focus on a project that is going on, the so-called Charter Project, where of the European Cultural Heritage Skills Alliance, where they are thinking about introducing, even in the European Commission, 1 sector of heritage. And it will be very interesting to see how all these different approaches, immovable, movable, digital, and intangible heritage will converge in the next 10 years. It will also totally change the policy in Belgium. And what I'm really glad for is that after 20 years, the heritage community of intangible cultural heritage in Belgium and in Europe is strong enough to take an interesting position in this newly rearranged field of cultural heritage. So I really applaud the 2003 convention for having this effect. Okay, this was a very quick tour in the complexity of working and living in Belgium. It offers a lot of opportunities, but probably it is not so easy to understand. So thank you for bearing with me, and I will see you hopefully next time soon. Thank you very much.